I'm not coming from McMurdo Sound. But at 7 this morning, I slid my kayak into the Hudson River, and the water was 55 degrees, and the air was 38. So this created a mist above the water, and it was so dense I couldn't see the far shore. And I paddled out, and soon enough, I heard a noise that sounded like grinding waves against a rock, and I knew a really big boat was coming up the river. So I tucked in near shore. This is what a tanker, an oil tanker, looks like at dawn on the Hudson River. So kayak is what I do when I'm not reading personal essays written by my students, some of whom I see here, or reading first-year seminar essays, or reading essays in relation to the natural world. I wrote a book about my excursions out onto the Hudson River that involve a lot of research, which is something that I also ask my students for. And these are very meandering essays. I put my boat in at the Troy Dam, and I paddled to Manhattan. I paddled around Manhattan a couple times, came back. And that kind of meandering, I feel I'm part of a very long tradition, beginning with Montaigne in the personal essay, of associative essays, and that's what I love to write. Before I wrote my book on the Hudson River, I wrote, I mostly, what I published were edited collections, which I love editing books. I have ideas about the book that I want to read, and then I go and I find people who will tell the story that I want to read. So a lot of it is about women and outdoor adventure, and one book about the Antarctic, where I did get to spend 6 weeks on a National Science Foundation grant, which was an extraordinary experience. So what I'm working on now is actually a book. I had the idea when I was 49 that I was going to learn every bird in the sky, including the pepperbird. And it's a really stupid thing to do if there's any birders in the room. You know that to learn your birds requires a good sense of hearing and good eyesight. And we all know what happens with time with both of those faculties. So it's a losing battle, but this is what I decided I wanted to do. And so I'm going to read from a chapter when in the early months of my learning to bird. I'm up in Maine with a man that I've fallen for, and we're looking for a bird called the Nelson's sparrow, also known as the Nelson sharp-tailed sparrow. I did not need to see Nelson. I was thrilled with the birds that we stumbled upon as we walked or kayaked, the northern parula and alder flycatchers, golden and ruby-crowned kinglets. Even though I did not need to see this bird, I loved that we were looking for the Nelsons. The hunt made me feel like a real birder, sparrows the holy grail. To arrive, you need patience. To arrive, you need an acute attention to detail, an eye line or the stripes on the chest, pot belly or short tail or the big bill. All of these qualifiers of short or big I found funny in relation to a bird not even the size of my hand. To know sparrows is to have a lover's attention to detail. To love sparrows is to love the underloved. Peter loves sparrows. In June, Peter had sent me a text lamenting the grasshopper sparrows had not returned to the wide fields of the Woodstock dump. No grasshoppers to be found. My heart drips a sea of grasshopper tears. His despair over a bird with such a lively name delighted me. I looked up the bird to find it, like its 8 cousins in the Amadramus genus, Latin for sandrunner, is a small bird with a big bill and a flat head. Most, Peter explained, were pathetic flyers. They would tumble into the grasses as if exhausted from a 4-foot flight. The grasshopper sparrow has a spit of a song, not ungrasshopper-like, and is one of the least interesting birds out there. For such a little bird, it needs a big space to breed, the Woodstock dump plus some, and it needs tall grasses. Grasslands are the fastest vanishing habitat in our country. Fragmentation, grazing, development are the top 3 reasons for the decline, and grasslands continue to be threatened because 85% are privately owned working landscapes. From 2006 to 11, 1.3 million acres of grasslands were plowed up for soybeans and corn. Iowa has only 1/10 of 1% of its original tall grass. The worry is that grassland states like the Dakotas will follow this trend. This doesn't bode well for many creatures, but certainly not the grasshopper sparrow, a bird that is easily overlooked. Maybe, Peter worried in his text, his grasshopper sparrows would never return. How could I not love a man who fretted over the fate of a little bird with a weak song and an even weaker flight? In pursuit of the Nelsons, we decided to abandon sitting on shore and try to find the bird by boat. We slid our long sea kayaks into Lurvy Spring Creek near Bass Harbor and paddled out in the early morning light. The creek was not more than 50 feet wide and the water clear and shallow. I could see the water, the green water grass waving in the faint current, and small fish swimming with ease. This was so different from the Hudson River, the water there turbid, holding its secrets. This water seemed to be smiling at the world, inviting us in. We followed the creek out a bit, leaving behind the road and the few cars clunking across a bridge. It felt like we were journeying into wilderness, all green and lush. We could have been in the boundary waters of Canada or in Alaska. Alaska was the territory of the 19th century American naturalist Edward William Nelson, whose name was given to this little bird. Several rodents were named for him as well. Within moments, Peter pointed toward a sound that was like a hot iron being dunked in cold water that emerged from the riverside. I could easily have paddled on by, thinking that it was the sound of the grasses swishing. Nelson. We paddled near the shoreline and stared into the grasses, looking for movement and hoping to hear another song. Soon up popped a bird, perching in a wobbling manner at the top of the riverside grasses. It then hopped down, straddling two stems of grass as if doing the splits. It paused for a moment to look out in the world, and I noted the orange racing stripes on its head. It then darted back into the grasses. What do you do after you're successful finding a bird? Kiss, celebrate, dance? After lingering for a while, staring into the grasses and hoping the bird would emerge again, we paddled on down the creek, sure of the next marvelous sight. Perhaps this is how a gambler feels after she has won. Keep playing and you will win again. The logic is flawed, but in birding it seemed to prove true. The more you see, the more you see. It breeds a fantastic sort of optimism, one in which the world and all its worries vanish. This sense that the world has faded far into a hazy background holds true for the gambler as well, shuttered in windowless casinos, playing timeless games. I too lost sense of time, that of the world and that of my own. I was a giddy 30-year-old, not an easily tired 49-year-old. But though I felt young, in the mornings I experienced the truth of my years, when my neck hurt from looking up for warblers and my back ached from standing still near the swamp. I am not a gambler, and I am not an addict, but I was drunk on all the birds in Maine. One bird led to the next, a greed for the next high took over. So then we head up toward a logging road called the Golden Road, which runs near Baxter State Park. And we left the Golden Road and drove into Baxter State Park, Mount Katahdin looming above us. I told Peter about the last time I had driven to Mount Katahdin was the winter of 1988. I was headed for the summit of the mountain with 5 women, all back to the land folks living in Maine. We carried packs and pulled sleds filled with ice axes and crampons, food and sleeping bags. Everything they ate on this trip they had grown themselves. One woman fried bacon from a pig she had raised, telling the others how many weeks needed to cure it. They all wore mittens that they had knitted from wool from their sheep. Meanwhile, I munched on my power bars and slipped on my Patagonia mittens and felt like a lightweight. I envied these women, that they knew how to spin wool and make yarn, but also that when the world went to hell, they would have their jars of applesauce and green beans to eat and warm mittens to wear through it all. A storm landed on the day we were to climb the mountain. I was at the back of the line, sinking into the steps cut by those in front of me. The snow was deep and heavy and still blowing in. We stopped midway up the mountain to decide to go up or down. As we came to a decision, I watched our deep footprints filling in with snow. Is anyone really good, and I mean really good, with a map and compass? I half yelled into the wind. I wasn't sure we'd find our way down. I voted against going up, regretting my choice even as I cast my wish. 4 voted for going down, 2 wanted to go up, and so we plunged down toward the hut at the base of the mountain. I told myself I would come back the next winter and summit Katahdin. It had taken me 22 years just to return to the park. What had I done in those years? What had I done that was more important than climbing this mountain? Peter and I checked into a one-room cabin on Daisy Pond. It was a spare open space, and we wedged the 2 single beds together. Peter returned to the car to bring out the rest of our gear by canoe. I pulled out my bins and tracked him as he paddled surely toward me with the suitcases, pillows, and towels piled high. It was sort of Beverly Hillbillies on a lake. From his shape and size, I knew which family he fell into, could see the crooked white line of his teeth, the length of his skinny legs, the blue of his eyes, no eye ring, the white hairs at the tip of his close-cut red beard, his thinning red hair cut neat. And still, I knew little about him, would never really know him. We did not settle in and relax at our romantic cabin. No, the pull to the next bird was on. Soon we were back in our car, off to Sandy Pond. From a flat rock we scanned the water. There, I said, pointing to a duck on the water. Peter put his bins to his eyes. That's a good bird, he said. Tell me what you see. All week, Peter had been coaching me. Something duck-like with a brown head. Okay, he said, what else? There's a yellow tip on its black bill. Anything about the eyes? Yellow. I was excited. Look at those eyes. I found the common golden eye in my Sibley guide. I wrote all of this. I wrote everything down in my notebook. The next morning, I had the foolish idea we would dawdle in our cabin, have breakfast, enjoy the lake, maybe even go for a swim. We're going to find a spruce grouse, Peter said, packing us out of the cabin and into the car at 6 in the morning. Bird, eat, sleep. I thought this was the best thing that had ever happened to me. On the last morning of our trip, we were lying in my tent, camped just outside of the park. The rising sun barely lit the yellow tent walls. We had been birding all day, every day for 10 days. I was tired. I was also happy to have learned some birds, to learn I was capable of learning, to learn that I knew nothing. Peter asked, what do you hear? His arms were wrapped around me. Winter wren. I paused and listened. Red-eyed vireo. I listened. Parula. More. Yellowthroat. Right, Peter said quietly. He kissed the top of my head. Good. I thought back to a year earlier when I couldn't even find a yellow warbler in the bush and felt proud of being able to identify these birds by ear. And to Peter's good, I poured, I love you and I want to spend my life with you. But really, all he said was good, and that was all he meant.